Thank you for having us here to present this report. Just start out with acknowledging that we have sort of a core team that we've developed over the last couple of years that produces this report. That's myself, Mary Hunsicker, Amanda Phillips, Greg Williams, Nick Tomieri, Isaac Schroeder, and Lynn DeWitt. But it's important to also note we're just sitting on the top of a pile of tons of work by many people here and all throughout the centers. We get contributions from 90 different folks that cover 23 different agencies. So this is a lot of other people's work that we bring together to provide this report for you. Okay, thanks. Next slide. Okay, great. So if you remember nothing else, we're going to start right off with giving you the highlights of the entire report. So our key takeaways we're going to boil down for you for 2025 were essentially that it was a good year. We had overall productive coastal conditions when we look at the physical oceanography, very productive system. And you could see that we saw measurements that showed that there was very diverse and abundant forage throughout the coast. However, there was a few sort of challenges, risk factors. Of course, most people will be familiar that there was record harmful algal blooms in Southern California. And even though we had some high precipitation at times, which alleviated the drought in California for the first time in 25 years, unfortunately, the rains and things we got were mostly warm, so snowpack throughout the West has remained exceptionally low, which could provide some challenges going forward. Next slide, please. So just to reiterate some of the sort of things we kind of categorize as being mixed to positive. Again, we had a very good upwelling season. The upwelling came in early. It was strong and it was very consistent throughout the year. However, the upwelling kind of shut down a little bit earlier, a few weeks earlier than it usually does. We don't know if that'll be an issue for next year or not. Then looking at more specifically at the prey that was out there was abundant anchovy, young year rockfish, juvenile salmon, and krill. So plenty of forage out there. In terms of salmon, we saw near average returns are predicted for Chinook coming back to Columbia Basin. Birds did quite well this year. They're not up to their best levels ever, but they had a good rebound from last year, which was a very low production year. So there was some rebounding in the birds. That's always good. Again, it's an indicator that there was plenty of forage out there for them. And then lastly, we have total revenue increased last year from fishing. This was primarily due to Pacific whiting, highly migratory species, market squid, whereas crab landings were actually decreased. Next slide, please. And then onto our sort of negative conditions that we saw last year. If you've seen the news anywhere, you probably realized last year was one of the hottest ocean years on record. In our region, in the Northeast Pacific, it was the largest heat wave we've tracked since we've been able to track these things since 1982. And there was record offshore sea surface temperatures across the Northeast Pacific. Again, we had this massive harmful algal bloom in the late winter, early spring last year. And this impacted not only marine life, but human health and fisheries. And we also had not only the normal domoic acid blooms, but we had some dinoflagellate blooms as well. There was also considerable whale entanglements that were similar to 2024 levels. The coastwide total landings was below the long-term average. And again, recall that California salmon fisheries remain closed. And lastly, we had several port groups that were closed due to major processor facilities closing. And groundfish port level revenue concentration of the revenue increase, which means the fisheries are kind of consolidating into smaller areas or fewer areas. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to go sort of season by season through the sort of physical oceanography, and then after I do that, I'll hand over to Mary. So next slide, please. So starting with the winter last year, we had actually this figure on the left is showing you essentially the West Coast and the sort of red-orange area. That is all region that is considered to be in a marine heat wave status. I've outlined the sort of coastal exclusive economic zone, the EEZ, and sort of that blue dashed line, if you can see it. And so we essentially started off the year with a lot of heat out in the sort of offshore region. We basically had a large leftover marine heat wave from the previous year. Next slide, please. And then right after that heat wave, it's still around. You can see in this picture on the left, that's February. The heat moved a little further offshore. But what we did see was in the coastal region some anomalous early upwelling, and this is something that we don't usually see. And you can these plots on the right, essentially this region that I've kind of highlighted. These are two different latitudes, and you'll notice that the sort of dark black line is far up above the sort of average dash blue line there, which indicates this unseasonable early upwelling that we had. Next slide, please. And one of the results of this is very possible that this early upwelling is what contributed to this major domoic acid harmful algal bloom event that occurred right after that anomalous early upwelling. Next slide, please. However, although this may have contributed to the harmful algal bloom, we do have some past studies that suggest early upwelling like that may have been something that was good for other species such as rockfish and the birds. Next slide, please. Moving right along into spring, we had strong seasonal spring, spring conditions. The spring bloom, essentially the time when there's a transition from usually generally downwelling to upwelling, and this occurred by April, and it was all throughout the coast. And so this picture on the left is showing essentially the upwelling, and you'll notice the dark black line again is far above the sort of dash blue line, which is the average conditions. So we had a nice strong spring transition. Next slide, please. And the good thing about upwelling is that it causes productivity, but also the downside, again, this is part of what allows you to have all these harmful algal blooms. So this picture on the right is from our friends down at SCOOS. It's a prediction of where you would have Pseudonychia, the diatom that creates domoic acid. And you'll notice that it's basically hot red all throughout the entire sort of California and Southern Oregon coast there. So again, although the upwelling is great for productivity, it also is something that helps you continue these harmful algal blooms. Next slide, please. And you can notice this as well. This was observed, the domoic acid was observed all along the whole coast. And this is showing where it was observed in various shellfish and fish as well. So you'll notice down in the south around 32 to 34 there, it was showing up in sardines, and that we think is probably the major pathway to get the domoic acid to all the sea lions that were impacted. And then you notice up towards the north, up towards Oregon, we're seeing this again, mostly in crabs and clams and things like that, the domoic acid. Next slide, please. And the other thing that was kind of a little bit more unusual in these just these last 2 years, we hadn't seen this for quite some time, but these last few years, besides the domoic acid being produced by diatoms, we're also having a resurgence of dinoflagellates, which produce PST and DST, different kinds of toxins. And those are primarily seen more to the north, but again, some in the south here, more to the north, and these primarily affect, again, shellfish. Next slide, please. So moving into summer, summer was great. We had continued very strong upwelling all along the coast. You can see that in the image on the left. If you can see the very sort of dark blue that's kind of hugged up right up next along the coast, particularly in Northern California and Southern Oregon. And so that led to us having nice, cool, nutrient-rich, productive coastal waters. But you'll note the large marine heat wave was still kind of lurking offshore there. Next slide, please. So the good thing about this upwelling is it leads to a lot of chlorophyll, and that's basically the base of our food chain going up to our fish. So this picture on the right is showing from a similar period of time the chlorophyll along the area. So you'll notice that Northern California and Southern Oregon and into Washington had very high levels of chlorophyll, so that's a good thing. Next slide, please. So the possible downside of that, however, is that when you do have these large summertime blooms, they tend to sink out and can affect the bottom oxygen levels. And lo and behold, this is the picture from the bottom oxygen from the JSO survey, and they saw one of the largest regions of low oxygen during their June sampling period that they've seen for many years in their time series. In fact, it may have been the lowest they've seen over such a large region for their entire time series. They've been collecting for about 20 years, I believe it is. So that's one of the downsides. Next slide, please. Then moving into fall, we had what is now being shown as the largest marine heat wave on record from this region. You can see it basically fills the entire map on the left side here. So this is the largest one we've seen since we've had these kind of measurements since 1982. Fortunately, although this is large in area, it's not nearly as impactful as the big 2014-15 blob event because this heat wave is mostly at the surface. It didn't last for that long, and it's just not going to penetrate into the coast during the summertime like the blob did. So it's just coming in the fall. However, we did set new records in absolute terms for the entire region. So around September 10th, the date of the picture on the left, the ocean reached its warmest average temperature across the region, about 0.5 degree centigrade warmer than normally. And the other issue was that when this heat wave came in, this basically ended upwelling or was following on the heels of upwelling ending, and that's about 1 month earlier than usual. Next slide, please. And along with very warm ocean conditions, this period was also some of the record warmest air temperatures over land, and that's what this figure on the right is showing. Next slide, please. And finally, just to see how this ended up for this year in terms of drought, you'll notice this picture on the left. As I mentioned earlier, California is finally, it's the white there on that map in California indicates there was no drought. So the first time it came out of drought in 25 years. The Pacific Northwest is still in drought status. These figures on the right are basically showing that the impacts of all these warm temperatures and low amount of precipitation and drought in the north leads to high stream temperatures. This figure sort of in the middle right, and then the picture on the far right is showing you that the stream flows were basically kind of low during this last year up in the north. Next slide. Okay, that's all for me. I'm going to hand it over to Mary to go through the ecological integrity.
Thanks, Andy. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you sound great.
Great, thanks. Okay, so to start, as Andy mentioned, I'm going to provide some information on the ecological conditions in the California current in 2025. Next slide. And I'll start by presenting some information on the forage community in the northern region of the California current. The figure here on the left shows the results of a cluster analysis that was applied to data from the Northwest Fisheries Science Center's Juvenile Salmon and Ocean Ecosystem Survey, also known as JSOS. The survey took place last June. The cluster analysis shown here and on some of the other slides helps us identify shifts in forage conditions over time. And the colors indicate relative catch per unit effort, where the blue indicates the forage species abundant, red indicates that they were low or rare, and gray indicates that they were close to their average abundance. And the horizontal bars separate the clusters of typically co-occurring species, and the vertical lines represent breaks in the assemblage structure between the years. So overall, the results from the cluster analysis indicate that the forage community composition in the Northern California current in this past year was similar to the previous 2 years. Most of the species, including salmon, squid, and jellies, were near or above their average abundance this past year. And this figure also indicates that there was a high abundance of yearling coho salmon, juvenile chum salmon, and sub-yearling chinook. In the time series figures shown on the right here, these figures here and some of the other slides, I'll just give you a brief description of them. The blue shaded area is the most recent 5 years of data. The dashed line is the long-term mean. The blue lines indicate plus or minus 1 standard deviation of the mean. And I put these figures here to show that the abundances of yearling coho salmon and yearling chum salmon in 2025, their abundances were at the highest in the time series, which started in 1998. And this is likely due to the good forage conditions in the Northern California current this past year, the past couple of years, including some good zooplankton and juvenile fishes. Some of the other surveys in the region, including the Newport hydrographic line, indicate that those lipid-rich northern copepods were above average during winter and spring and throughout much of the summer. Also, some observations from the Northern California Current Spring Ecosystem Survey indicate that there were high abundances of young of year sardine and whitebait smelt, and moderate abundances of rockfish and krill. So again, overall, the information from the different ecosystem surveys and the Northern California Current indicate that the forage conditions were overall pretty good in this region in 2025. Next slide, please. So this slide here shows the cluster analysis of the forage community in the Central California Current, which is based on data from the Southwest Fisheries Science Center's Rockfish Recruitment and Ecosystem Assessment Survey. The cluster analysis here indicates, again, that the forage assemblage in this region has been relatively consistent over the past few years, maybe past 5 years or so. And similar to the Northern California Current, many of the forage species were near or above their average abundance this past year. A few things to note here are that rockfishes were highly abundant for a third consecutive year this past year, so that the increase in abundance could be related to those pulses of winter upwelling that Andy had mentioned. We did see a continued downward trend of adult anchovy the past 2 years. However, their abundances are still well above average. Other species or life stages, such as the young of year anchovy, young of year Pacific hake, and myctophids were slightly below average in 2025. And we also want to note that catches of pyrosomes significantly increased in 2025 from the year before, and that they were at their highest levels on record in the Central California Current this past year, and they were also pretty highly abundant in the Southern California Current as well. Next slide, please. In the Southern California Current, the forage assemblage is sampled through the Cal Coffee program, and the assemblage has been strongly consistent over the past 8 years. In 2025, this region was once again characterized by high abundances of larval anchovy, larval hake, and mesopelagics. There were also high abundances of larval squid and flatfishes, including soles and sand dabs. Notably, we do see a decline in larval rockfish in the Cal Coffee region from high abundances over the past several years to below average. We can also see here on some of these time series on the right that larval anchovy remained well above average this past year. So overall, throughout most of the California Current, these regional surveys are indicating that the forage conditions were actually pretty good this past year. Next slide. In 2025, coast-wide sampling of the coastal pelagic species was done as part of the inaugural Integrated West Coast Pelagic Survey. The data collected on these surveys are intended to support coastal pelagic and Pacific hake fisheries. Based on some of the preliminary observations from this survey, the CPS assemblage continued to be dominated by the central stock of northern anchovy and jack mackerel, whereas the biomass of other species, including Pacific sardine and Pacific herring and Pacific mackerel, remained low. We can see from the distribution map on the left, this is the core region of the survey, that jack mackerel dominated CPS samples offshore of Washington and Oregon, and northern anchovy comprised most of the samples south of Fort Bragg. In the nearshore region, where fishing vessels sample within 5 nautical miles from the shore, which is in the figure shown on the right here, northern anchovy were prevalent south of Bodego Bay, Pacific sardine were most abundant south of Monterey Bay and around Fort Bragg, and jack mackerel and Pacific herring were dominant north of Fort Bragg. Next slide, please. Krill were also quantified during the Integrated West Coast Pelagic Survey and the Canadian Ecosystem and Pacific Hake Trawl Survey. The nautical area scattering coefficient, or the NASC, represents krill abundance. And what we can see from this figure in the middle here is that krill abundance increased in 2025 compared with the past 2 survey years, which were 2021 and 2023. And this increase was particularly in the Northern California Current, which we can see from the bar plot, and also the plot of their distribution on the left. We do note that krill did increase this past year, but it was not anomalously high. Most of the krill were located near the 200-meter shelf break off Oregon and Washington and British Columbia, and less krill were observed off California this past year. Next slide, please. The diets of highly migratory species and seabirds that were collected by commercial and recreational fishermen and our other partners along the coast indicate that the predators were benefiting from the good forage conditions in the ecosystem over the last 2 years. For example, Pacific hake, anchovy, and sardines dominated the diets of swordfish, bluefin tuna, and albacore in 2024. Our time series only goes through 2024 at this point. Notably, the proportion of hake and swordfish diets surpassed anchovy as the dominant prey item for the species in 2024. And rockfish consumption increased for all three predators and was near to above average for swordfish and albacore in 2024. Given what we've seen from our ecosystem surveys in 2025, we can expect that they have probably been consuming a similar suite of prey in 2025 as well. Next slide, please. These figures here show the diets of seabirds and fledgling production of seabirds at Southeast Farallon Island in Central California. The diets of seabird chicks at Southeast Farallon Island indicate above average consumption of anchovies, krill, and juvenile rockfish by seabirds in this region, which aligns with observations of these prey species in the Rockfish Recruitment and Ecosystem Assessment Survey. We also note that the piscivorous seabirds at Destruction Island in Washington and Uquina Head, Oregon, relied more on smelts, sand lance, and juvenile rockfish and herring in the Northern California current area. In 2025, fledgling production increased at most seabird colonies in California and Oregon and Washington, at least at those colonies for which we have data. For example, we can see this increase in production for Brandt's cormorant, Cassin's auklet, and common murre here on this slide at Southeast Farallon Island. Notably, Cassin's auklet double brooding levels were high in 2025. More than 80% of the pairs that fledged a chick started a second brood, which is typical of years when the marine conditions are good. But in general, the overall improvement in seabird reproductive success is probably a reflection of the good forage conditions throughout the system and of that anomalous late winter upwelling that can help improve parental condition. Next slide, please. In the next two slides, I'm going to shift from talking about the forage community to highlighting some updates to our salmon stoplight tables. This slide shows the Northern California current stoplight table, which summarizes the physical and biological indicators that support qualitative outlooks of Chinook salmon returning to Bonneville Dam and smolt to adult survival of Oregon coast coho salmon. The colors in this table represent a given year's indicator relative to a particular reference period. The green and blue represent indicators that are greater than 1 or 2 standard deviations above the mean. The orange and red represent indicators that are greater than 1 or 2 standard deviations below the mean, and the yellow means the indicators are within plus or minus 1 standard deviation of the mean. And we show the blue arrows here to highlight that Chinook salmon from smolt year 2024 and coho salmon from year 2025 represent the dominant adult age classes returning to the Columbia Basin in 2026. And looking at the table, we see that in 2025, most of the physical and biological indicators are yellow or near average, and a few of the indicators are above average, which suggests that juvenile salmon experienced some moderate ocean conditions this past year. The indices of winter larval biomass were lower than average, suggesting that there were less favorable feeding conditions for salmon. However, many of the basin and local scale indicators are consistent with the fair ocean conditions that are fairly favorable for salmon stocks in the Northern California current. Overall, the ocean conditions in 2025 suggest average survival for coho returning in 2026. And the conditions in 2024, which reflect a mix of poor and intermediate conditions, suggest near average returns for Chinook in 2026. In addition, Brian Burke at the Northwest Fisheries Science Center uses a quantitative model that uses stoplight indicators to predict the counts of Chinook salmon returning to the Columbia Basin in 2026. And those predictions indicate that the counts of Chinook will be near the 10-year average. Next slide, please. The stoplight tables shown here were developed for 3 California Chinook salmon stocks, including Sacramento River Fall, Central Valley Spring, and Klamath River Fall Chinook salmon. The color coding in this table represents quintiles of hypothesized habitat conditions, which range from poor in the red colors to blue in the blue to favorable, which is shown in the blue colors, blue and green colors. The blue box highlights Chinook salmon from breed years 2023 and 2024 that migrated to the ocean in 2024 and 2025 and are the dominant adult age classes returning to the rivers and in 2026 and 2027. While there has been an overarching multi-decadal decline in habitat conditions for these three salmon stocks, indicators for 2023 and 2024 brood years do suggest some marginal improvement in habitat conditions, at least for Central Valley Spring Chinook and Sacramento River Fall Chinook. For example, the indicators suggest that outmigration flows were improved for these two stocks and early marine predation pressure may have been relatively low. However, the recent outmigration temperatures were unfavorably warm, and the counts of natural area spawners for these stocks have been poor, which is unfortunate because they can't really take advantage of some of that favorable outmigration flow of the past couple of years. It is unusual to see this contrasting pattern of highly favorable outmigration flows and highly unfavorable outmigration temperatures, which makes it difficult to predict the effects on the Central Valley Spring Chinook and Sacramento River Fall Chinook, as well as on their returns in 2026 and 2027. For Klamath River Fall Chinook, both outmigration temperatures and sea surface temperatures were unfavorable during the recent breeding years, and these conditions are consistent with low returns expected for 2026 and 2027. Next slide, please. The last piece of ecological information I will highlight today is on whale entanglements. Confirmed West Coast entanglement reports in 2025 were below the peak years of 2015 to 2018 and were slightly lower than the number of confirmed reports in 2024. Humpback whales continue to be the most common species reported. And again, sort of this late summer and early fall increases in habitat compression and nearshore increases in anchovy, which are main prey of humpback whales, is likely contributing to these elevated entanglement risks for humpbacks over the past several years. Confirmed entanglements for all of the other whales show decreasing or neutral trends over the past 5 years. Next slide, please. Similar to past years, a whale entanglement risk restricted the Dungeness crab fishery on the West Coast in 2025. The figure here shows the spatial temporal history of closures and management restrictions in the Dungeness crab fishery from 2021 to 2025 due to whale entanglements, domoic acid, and other concerns. The solid black line indicates state borders, and the dashed line indicates the border between the Northern and Central California management zones. And the gray shading indicates the commercial Dungeness crab fishing season in each of those regions. In 2025, there were fishery closures in Central and Northern California due to whale entanglements, and in Oregon and Washington, there were gear reductions and depth restrictions implemented to reduce the risk of whale entanglement risks there. 2025 does mark the 7th consecutive year that the commercial Dungeness crab fishery has been delayed in California because of marine life entanglement risk returns. And it's also the first year that the fishery in California operated on some sort of restriction for the entire season. Next slide, please. And now I will pass the baton to Amanda Phillips to talk about some of the human activities and well-being, human well-being indicators.
Hi, Mary. Thank you. As she mentioned, my name is Amanda Phillips, and I'm with the Northwest Fisheries Science Center. And I'm going to talk about some of the human activities and well-being today. Next slide, please. We saw an increase in total fishery landings in 2025, up 26% from 2024. This is an increase from 2024, but is primarily driven by Pacific whiting spatial distribution, returning to the waters north of the California and Oregon border. The salmon fishery remained closed in California in 2025. HMS, Pacific whiting, market squid, and shrimp all saw an increase in commercial landings, while recreational landings remained below the long-term averages. Next slide, please. Revenue also saw an increase from 2024, again, mostly driven by those Pacific whiting catches and market squid. It was a good year for revenue in crab, where it has remained higher than long-term averages for the past several years. And notably, while HMS and non-whiting groundfish saw increases in landings, the revenue for HMS and non-whiting groundfish is lower than previous 5-year averages. Next slide, please. Coastwide, there was a decline in fisheries diversification by vessel to the lowest level observed since 1991, although there were some small increases in Oregon and Washington ports relative to 2023. Coastwide commercial fishing revenue concentration has remained low for all fisheries combined, but when looking at specific management groups, we see that HMS revenue concentration has continued to decrease, while the groundfish sector is seeing increased revenue concentration over time, with 2024 at the highest observed concentration since 1982. Next slide, please. For connectivity, 4 ports closed processor plants in 2024, Bellingham, Newport, Crescent City, and Eureka, which are all highlighted on this figure. Those 4 plants, all but Bellingham, saw either DTS or non-DTS fisheries eliminated from their fishery participation networks, implying that it's no longer an important fishery for that port. Astoria continued a recent trend of increasing the number of fisheries and increased connectivity between those fisheries. Bodega Bay also showed an increase in the number of fisheries with the expected decline in connectivity. Tillamook, Coos Bay, Eureka, Fort Bragg, and Morro Bay all faced substantial declines in the number of fisheries per port in the past few years, without the expected increases connectivity between fisheries, suggesting a reduced opportunity for participation. Next slide, please. Social vulnerability and fishing engagement are shown here for 2023. Quick note, these figures show the overall engagement values and are not adjusted for population size. So communities with large populations often have a higher engagement value. Appendix Q in the report has the same figure with per capita engagement values for your perusal. The communities of Port Orford, Crescent City, Fort Bragg, and Los Angeles had both high commercial fishing engagement and high social vulnerability. Of particular interest is Crescent City, which experienced a processor closure in 2024, and Fort Bragg, which was highlighted as a port facing a reduced number of fisheries and connectivity in 2024. Communities in the upper right quadrant on these figures may suggest that they are particularly vulnerable to the changes we are seeing in 2024 and 2025. Next slide, please. So I will pass it back to Mary to go over some of the summaries for 2025.
Great, thanks, Amanda. So looking back over 2025, one of the main take-homes was that productive upwelling fosters some favorable ecosystem conditions throughout the California current. As Andy mentioned, there was a large heat wave and record sea surface temperatures this past year, but they were held mostly offshore due to the strong and consistent upwelling. There was also abundance in the diverse prey sources out there for predators, including juvenile salmon, juvenile rockfish, anchovies, and krill. And also some of our model predictions indicate that we could expect near average returns for Chinook salmon returning to the Columbia Basin in 2026 and 2027. Next slide, please. There were also unfavorable conditions this past year as well. As we mentioned, there was that large harmful algal bloom event that had large impacts on marine mammal life, as well as on humans and fisheries. There's also evidence of a large area of low bottom oxygen in June and slightly shortened upwelling season that could have that was followed by some of these warm waters coming up along the coast. Next slide, please. Some indicators that raise concern within our team, certainly the record low snowpack that we've seen on the West Coast that could have some important impacts on out-migration flows and out-migration temperatures for salmon in California, Oregon, and Washington. Also, we've had HAB events over the past several years that have had, again, important impacts on marine life, human health, and fisheries. With respect to the human well-being indicators that Amanda had mentioned, we're seeing high social vulnerability in ports with processor closures and reduced fisheries diversity. The California salmon fishery has been closed for the past few years, and we're also seeing increased revenue concentration in the groundfish sector. And also overall, there are fewer fisheries per vessel and reduced IOPAC port fishery connectivity. This reduced diversity and connectivity in these fisheries can in turn reduce the resilience of ports and communities to environmental or regulatory shocks. Next slide, please. I also wanted to mention some of the new ESR-related activities that are included with the report and can mostly be found in the appendices. So, for example, Appendix E includes a synthesis of long-term projections of the spatial distribution of groundfish, CPS, and HMS under changing ocean conditions, and the potential implications of these projections to fisheries on the West Coast. Appendix E also provides an overview of some new research that illustrates the potential utility of HMS fishing fleets as sentinels for ecological changes during climate extremes, such as marine heat waves. This work demonstrates that HMS vessel monitoring systems better capture shifts in the climate-related shifts in albacore tuna and bluefin tuna than environmental variables such as sea surface temperature. In Appendix U, we introduce a framework for developing ecosystem indicators to measure the potential effects of new ocean use sectors on important ecosystem components in the California current. And lastly, in 2026, we're expecting more detailed short-term forecasts of ocean conditions, which will help us continue to improve our understanding of climate impacts on the California current ecosystem and the West Coast fisheries and communities. Next slide, please. And now I'll hand it over to Andy to finish us out with outlooks for this coming year.
Great. Thanks, Mary. We can move right on to the next slide, please. Okay, so looking ahead, the forecast for 2026, one of the biggest things that impacts our, as most people know, our whole climate out here on the West Coast is whether we're in El Nino or not. And so this is the CPC forecast for that. So you'll notice we're still technically in a La Nina right now, those blue bars. But as we head forward into this year, you'll notice that the ENSO is basically going into a neutral state, but there's now a forecast that we potentially could be heading towards an El Nino as we go towards next fall. Next slide, please. As we look ahead to the drought, the current drought outlook for the next several months is showing that most of the West Coast will not be in drought conditions, that will be having some precipitation. What I haven't shown here, however, though, is that we do have the early measurements on snowpack, and snowpack is extremely low, I think, as we've mentioned a couple times throughout this presentation. So snowpack is very low. Even though we won't be in drought, we're looking at very low snowpack for the coming year. Next slide, please. In terms of the heat, this is the most recent imagery I have that's science quality showing the ocean temperatures, and you'll notice we have quite a bit of warm water offshore. This is really interesting because we usually only get this much warm water that's close to shore at this time of the year when we're already in an El Nino, and we are not currently in an El Nino. So this may have some impacts going forward into 2026. Next slide, please. In terms of the forecasts of marine heat waves, the current forecast done by the modeling right now is suggesting that we will continue to have offshore heat waves through the spring, summer, and fall of next year, and that those heat waves will continue to come into the coastline, typically not until midsummer or late fall next year. Next slide, please. In terms of, we have some regional forecast models from the JSCOPE model showing Oregon and Washington. This model also suggests that we will be looking at some fairly warm, anomalously warm waters as we go into spring and summer this coming year. Next slide, please. This model also predicts that we'll actually have lower than normal chlorophyll going into spring and summer, followed by higher chlorophyll towards the end of the summer. Next slide, please. The model also predicts that the oxygen levels at the bottom will be lower than normal during the spring and summer and cover a fairly large area. So we may be looking at something similar to what we had this past year when we saw those the JSOS survey. Next slide, please. And that's it for our forecasting, and that's the end of our presentation as well. I just want to take a moment to, again, acknowledge our core team members who are not the presenters, but are equally important to produce their support. And here's all their pictures, their lineup, and their names. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much all for that amazing presentation. There's so much information here, so really appreciate it. And for everyone in attendance, just a reminder that the full report, including all of the appendices, is in the briefing book. So we'll put in a link for that. But we've reached our question portion of the presentation. So for everyone online, please raise your hand and we'll go through questions. To raise your hand, there's a reactions button. If you click on it, there should be a raise hand feature, a little blue hand. All right, Yvonne, start us off.
Thank you. So I figure I'll be a guinea pig in asking what are probably some dumb questions so that other people feel comfortable doing that as well. So first, thank you very much. This was awesome as usual. And I noted in the chat, not that there weren't lovely, excellent graphics throughout, but one of the things that I particularly noticed was those little, in Amanda's presentation, those little vessel gear target species icons. Like, wow, what a great way to convey exactly what you're talking about in the tiniest space possible. So thanks for thinking those up. But let's see. I wanted to ask about marine heat waves versus El Nino, La Nina. You know, as Andy noted, we have for a long time really kept our brains in the, you know, if El Nino, then this is happening. If La Nina, then that is happening sort of mode. And I'm curious to know, now that we've had these a lot more marine heat waves and larger marine heat waves in recent years, is that changing at all our thinking about how our ocean resources are affected by the El Nino, La Nina sort of switching system? And then I had another separate question. Thanks.
Hi, Yvonne. Okay, I'll take a stab at answering that. So so we had a good example of that. I guess it was the year before last, right? We had a strong El Nino that came in, right? But it was sandwiched in between heat waves. Okay, so I guess the difference is the heat waves we've been having ever since the blob. So the blob is a whole different case, really. But the heat waves we've been having sort of since then, they have this sort of annual cycle where they sort of form in the sort of spring, but they form really far offshore. They're not really affecting our coastline or our fisheries. And then those heat waves tend to get larger during the year, and they then, basically as soon as the upwelling shuts down in the late summer or early fall, that's when those heat waves tend to come into the shore. And we're not seeing huge impacts from those, at least not ones that we're that we're detecting, or we've been able to have enough of them yet to really say that those sort of fall impacting heat waves are doing much, other than they probably contribute to some of the harmful algal blooms, particularly in the Northwest region. So that is sort of a different time scale than an El Nino. So again, I have to point back to a couple of years ago, we had this El Nino that came, and then El Nino still tended to do all the things that we typically thought an El Nino did. So you remember we, in the report, I believe it was the year before last, we had a sort of a list of the things we predicted an El Nino would do. And we were actually pretty, I was heartily surprised that we did pretty well. And most of the things that folks predicted an El Nino would do, they ended up doing. So even though we've got these heat waves and sort of, we can swap back and forth between sort of a summer fall heat wave and then a wintertime El Nino, the El Ninos are still mostly doing what we expect they would do. And same thing sort of with La Ninas. Now, I say all that, and again, I just mentioned though, we've got something really weird this year, which is we've got warm surface temperatures all on the coast that if I showed anyone this picture and didn't tell you it was not an El Nino, most people would go, oh my God, we're in the middle of an El Nino. So this year may be a pretty interesting year. We'll have to keep a close look on what happens as the spring develops. So, I mean, normally we would have upwelling start to kick in another month, and all that warm coastal heat will go away, and hopefully we won't have many problems. But again, it's too early to say. The forecast models right now are all predicting that that's what will happen, that we will have, upwelling and things will go back to sort of normal. But again, those models tend to not do great at this time of year. And those kind of models all sort of missed the blob when it happened too. So they're not so great at predicting the oddball events. They're good at predicting the things we kind of understand, but not the oddball. So hopefully that kind of answers your question, Yvonne.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate you sort of laying that out in the year pattern, and that's helpful. So my second sort of question, big picture issue, and this is where I am really uncertain, is I noticed in the report there was a discussion of juvenile rockfish serving as prey for a variety of species, including coho salmon. And as a Washingtonian and someone who's been listening for a long time to all the discussions about what is happening to Puget Sound salmon as they hit the sound and their ocean survival rate, or even just their survival rate within the sound and their ability to grow to adulthood. I know this is, these comments in here are about, what's happening in the offshore area, but I just, I started to think about the combination of all the work that Washington State has been doing to recover rockfish in Puget Sound, and then I started to think about the recovery of our offshore rockfish from overfished status and how that seems to be supplying a lot of juvenile rockfish for other species to eat. And I just wondered, are we already taking a look at the potential for improving Puget Sound rockfish species stock statuses for production of juvenile rockfish in Puget Sound, which could possibly then help salmon that emerge into the sound from freshwater streams? So like I said, that is a extreme lack of knowledge question on my part, but and I realize probably a challenge to answer in this group, but I just wanted to sort of throw that thought out there. And the other thing was Mary flashed what I found is figure E7 in Appendix E about center of gravity shifts. So where are these different species moving with different shifts in the ecosystem? And I would love a chance to think more about that figure, but maybe not take up everybody else's time with that. Thanks.
Thanks, Yvonne, for your comments and questions. I'm going to let Kiva answer maybe she might have some answers for the rockfish question. But I will say for Appendix E, yeah, thanks for bringing that up. We'd be happy, maybe we could talk about that a little bit more next week at the meeting. I also wanted just to mention that within that synthesis of those long-term projections of the spatial distribution of groundfish and CPS and HMS, the CCI team is working to develop a dashboard that would allow council users to interact and produce summary reports across different sets of species and different indicators of shifts in distribution and at multiple scales. So that could also be a really useful tool to the council and management teams and advisory bodies at some point. But Kiva, I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah, the main point I was going to make is rockfish can produce a ton of larvae and juveniles at really, really low stock sizes. And we saw that when they were recovering, they were completely, when we see now that there were some really big year classes of rockfish when they were at sort of record low abundances. And this is obviously off the coast. Like I think 1999 and 2008 were really big year classes. Unfortunately, I don't think John Field is here and he would correct me. Yeah, so I think that forage would certainly help salmon in Puget Sound. And I think the situation in Puget Sound, they might be at even lower abundances in Puget Sound than they were off the coast. So I'm not sure it's quite apples to apples. But at least off of the coast, I don't know that we ever really saw an effect of low stock sizes on recruitment. If that makes sense.
Thanks so much for those questions, Yvonne, to start us off, and everyone for those answers. Andrew, is this a response to this question or a new question?
Yeah, totally. Kiva's absolutely correct. It's interesting how rockfishes are capable of bouncing back even when the adult population sizes are low. And so in California, back in the year 2000, adult populations were really low, likely due to overfishing. But we had to set up a lot of rockfish closures. Like a lot of the coast was closed to rockfish fishing. And the models projected that the rockfish wouldn't be rebuilt for about 60 years. But fortunately, they're rebuilt now, and they're rebuilt within 20 years. And that's because there's lots of strong recruitment classes subsequent to the closures. So the combination of limiting fishing, but then also environmental conditions facilitated high young of the year classes throughout the 2000s. And that caused the stocks to be rebuilt quicker than we anticipated. And so prior to 2000, the reason that the models were predicting that it would take so long to rebuild was that there was, in addition to overfishing, there was lots of years of very low recruitment. And so they were basing recruitment estimates upon the conditions that occurred over the previous 20 years. But then things turn around and whatever it is that causes rockfish recruitment to be high, it was much higher in the 2000s than it was in the 1980s and 1990s. And so even though the adult populations were low, the rockfish stocks were able to rebuild pretty rapidly.
Thanks for that additional information, Andrew. All right, I see Dick has his hand up. Dick, do you want to come off mute and ask your question? And for everyone else, just remember there's that reactions button and then the blue hand. Go ahead, Dick.
All right. Thanks, Jessica. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, there's probably a lot of background noise. I got to ask forgiveness here. I'm trying to pull crab gear at the same time. I just wanted to make a...
Oh, I think we might have lost you, Dick. Did a button get pressed while you're pulling crab gear? Again, so impressive.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay
I can
now?
hear you again. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, my apologies. I wanted to just make a comment regarding Andy's presentation and actually two One is that I completely agree with the water temperatures that we saw. They were extremely high, sometimes as much as 67 degrees. And yet underneath the albacore were down just slightly underneath, and they would come to the surface as they began to feed. So it kind of indicated to me that the surface temperature was extremely warm, and that the water just slightly under the surface was the normal temperature that they would actively be in. So I just wanted to comment on that. And the other thing I wanted to ask about was the pyrosomes, because I did not see pyrosomes like we have been seeing in the prior years. So I just wondered if that was something that I missed. Did he say that there were, or Andy, did you say that there were a large number of pyrosomes or not? Because I saw basically none after about the middle of the summer. Thank you.
That was actually that. Thanks, Dick. That was actually Mary that was talking about the pyrosomes, and I believe it's more to the south. Is that correct, Mary?
Yes, they were seeing on the Rockfish Recruitment Ecosystem Assessment Survey, they were seeing high numbers of pyrosomes in Central California and Southern California. And those surveys, I believe, are like in the spring and summer, spring, early summer. In the north, though, they were not seeing a lot of pyrosomes in the Northern California current region.
Great. Thanks so much, Dick, for those
Thank
observations that
you.
are kind of like the on the water observation that corroborate some of the oceanographic information that we're seeing. So really appreciate also your information on albacore schools. And thank you for joining while fishing. I'm always so impressed. I'm not seeing any hands, but I have some questions and some comments, so I'll take this time to sneak those in. First off, really excited to hear about that dashboard with the central tendencies for species distribution shifts. Super cool. Can't wait to see what that looks like in practice. So kind of waiting for that and appreciated that information in the appendix. I also really want to say thanks for the ecosystem interactions with new ocean use sectors, that Appendix U, and the work done there. I think that information is going to be really useful for some of the potential quick responses and call areas that may be coming forward through some of the BOEM processes for whether it be oil and gas that we're seeing kind of come out. So if I'm like a habitat committee, if I'm putting on my marine planning committee hat, so taking off the EWG hat there, really appreciate that information because I know that was an ask that the council was looking for when thinking about offshore wind siting. So more ecosystem community information around kind of spatial use siting. But my question, those were my comments. Now I'll get to a question. My question, I think it was in your presentation, Andy, and this might be probably a Yvonne Camp question where I'm just not as familiar, but on slide 17, you were talking about marine heat waves and kind of looking at that distribution off of the West Coast, and it seemed like there were these cooler like bubble areas off Oregon and Washington. And I was just curious what's causing that. Is it upwelling that's causing that at that time period? Or what is causing kind of that buffering that's happening kind of right off the coast?
It's the upwelling. Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm getting there slowly but surely. And then
Yeah, I mean, my byline for this year was that, we had all this hot water, but I keep saying upwelling kind of saved the day. So we had, unlike some other years where heat waves have been offshore and they come in, I don't know if you remember, I think it was 3 years ago, we had this sort of upwelling pattern that was like a sawtooth where we were getting strong week. And so we were seeing heat waves just come in, in the middle of summer. So we had one of the strongest heat waves ever this year, but because we had that consistent, strong, positive upwelling, we really didn't have too many times of slackening of the wind. So that kept the coast warm, kept the heat wave offshore. So the upwelling really is our saving buffer. So yeah, that's pretty much what's going on.
okay, thanks for that. And then I think for Amanda, for you, I had a question around the networks and kind of the decrease in the DTS and other groundfish non-trawl. I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit more to like what drop-offs you're seeing that are causing those, because that one kind of shocked me a bit, and I was just curious what is some potential rationale for why we're seeing those networks change and kind of that in that non-trawl groundfish sector.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. It's a little bit early to try and pinpoint exactly what the causes are, but one of the things that were highlighted in the slide that I showed was that each of those ports did have a processor closure, and a lot of those processors were processing groundfish. The closures were in 2024, and these networks are in 2024, so it's kind of a year where the processors were half open in some of the ports. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens in 2025. We're kind of waiting to see if some of the nearby ports are going to pick up those groundfish, or if other processors might move in to fill the gap. But it kind of aligns with what we are seeing with revenue concentration in groundfish, where fewer and fewer ports are taking higher and higher portions of the revenue across the coast.
Great. And just a follow up, so I'm tracking, right? So when you're
Sure.
saying like for those networks and those nodes, and this is just because I haven't read it in detail, I'm sure the information's all in there. You're tracking that at the port level. So if a processor closes at one port, you're not accounting for that revenue just coming into a different port because those landings are occurring where there is a processing facility. Am I correct in that?
That's correct. And
Okay.
it's at the IOPAC port. So that's,
Level.
could include multiple, ports and processors within kind of that IOPAC port grouping. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. That helps me, because I was just wondering if it was a true full loss to, let's say, like Oregon, or if it's just a redistribution. And so it sounds like
Yeah, I think
it could be a redistribution as well.
it could be a redistribution. We've seen some signals that at least part of it might actually be a full loss. And I think it's really going to take getting next year's data when we've had a full year of those closures to kind of narrow down what the effects might be.
Great. Thank you. Kiva, I see your hand. Go for it.
Yeah, I was also curious about these, and mostly because I think that it's really important, and I think this is information that's not really entering into the council process elsewhere, and it has it affects a lot of FMPs, and I think like the offshoot effects of all of these closures and this consolidation pops up in like very in ways that we aren't always able to link the cause and effect in the gap, and the GMT aren't necessarily thinking about how processor closures are leading to their problems. So that's sort of where I'm coming from, is trying to connect those dots a little bit more, and I can't stop thinking about widow rockfish. And so I was wondering, like, with this consolidation, like, are there certain species that you like, we don't know the causes, but can you dig more into sort of like what the patterns of consolidation look like across species, and that sort of thing, at all? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you, Kiva. The revenue consolidation currently is done at the FMP level, so we haven't, and the FPNs actually are also done at a higher level than species. But I know some folks who work on the tile index, which is our index that tracks revenue concentration, are currently working on a project that breaks it down to the species level. So we can think about maybe if we find something interesting from that analysis, including things at a finer scale in next year's report. I do agree that looking at the groundfish sector, especially since we're seeing the highest revenue concentration there, would be really interesting to see if there's patterns at the species level.
Cool. Yeah, thanks.
Do we have other questions from the EWG or anyone online? I'll just be a broken record. To raise your hand, the reactions tab has a blue hand. Oh, good. I saw one come up. Go ahead, Deb.
Hey, great presentation. Thank you very much to all the presenters and all the hard workers. Most appreciated. I was just curious relative to the whale entanglements. Are there any information on how those entanglements are distributed among any particular gear types? And I'm not sure who that should go to. But that was my question.
Okay, I can say that in the report, there is information on the gear types that in which the entanglements occurred, but I don't know. It's not super specific. I think there are some challenges in assigning which gear which the entanglements occurred in, but there is kind of like a general description of those as well. But I'll let others speak up too if they know more about this.
Yeah, I'll say, Deb, there is an annual report that comes out that has the annual entanglement record and the fisheries attributed by NIMPs for each one of those entanglements that are able to be identified. And from the state perspective, we're starting to get, some of our phased in line marking occurring. So there is some of that will be coming forth in the future as well, which would help attribute those entanglements to certain fisheries. And there was just a federal register notice published on the sablefish pot fisheries line marking and gear marking regulations that are being proposed. So that's another space in which the council process has moved forward with line and gear marking and best practices. And I saw other hands go up. Andrew, go for it.
Thanks. Kind of a follow-up to that question. I'm not sure if anybody is studying this, but when I first started to hear about whale entanglements about 10 years ago, it seemed that when it happened, it was a death sentence to the whale, like basically a slow death due to the gear entanglement. But I think I've heard, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard that there's now ways to mitigate like the entanglements. There's techniques to try to remove the, I guess, the ropes and things that the whales get caught up in. Can anybody talk about ways that we can help the whales once they become entangled?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Does anyone else want to take this question? Or I can at least speak from the, I can put on another hat, which is I'm one of the members on the take reduction team for the sablefish pot fishery gear, learning a lot through that process. And I'll put the link into the chat here for that page. There's a lot of really good presentations and a lot of really good information about some of the topics you're talking about there, Andrew, on assigning mortality and serious injury to different entanglement cases and the difference between observed entanglement versus opportunistic entanglements, and that there also is a NOAA-based response team that goes out there and does some of this entanglement response work. So lots of information there. I don't think we need to dive fully into it, but I can at least give you the references there, and it'll have some of the papers and that are being used to kind of do that assignment. To your point of not every entanglement is a death sentence. There is an assigned mortality and serious injury category. And if the whale is disentangled, then there is kind of a proration process as well, when also coming up with bycatch estimates attributed to different listed fisheries. And Dick, I saw your hand go up. Did you want to speak to this too, or have a different question?
Actually, I do in some respects. We've been working.
All right, Dick, I think that button got pressed again. We heard the same
Oh,
sound. Try again.
Can you hear me
Yeah,
better, Jessica? I'm sorry. Okay. All
yeah,
right.
I
Thank
got you
you.
now.
I have to put the phone up by my face. Sorry.
No.
I just wanted to, I have done a lot of work with alternative gear. And there are some methods that we put together that have minimized, potential interaction, and that is something that we've been very, very conscious of in the Dungeness crab industry. The one thing that I wanted to ask was, has there been consideration on the feeding habits of the animals in general in terms of the entanglement? Because what we see as fishermen is that on the water, in the springtime, the animals are much more aggressive. They've traveled 2,000 miles, or whatever they've traveled, and any opportunity to feed, they are extremely aggressive. Whereas in the fall, they tend to be more lethargic, ready to migrate, thinking about other things besides, the feeding aspect of it. So we tend to think that, potentially the activity level could increase the opportunity for them to, get entangled with vertical lines. And that was something I wanted to ask about. Has anybody looked at that? Thank you.
Thanks, Dick. Mary, was that part of some of the prey related work in that entanglement section of the ESR?
Well, I think those are the papers that have been published showing that a lot of what happens, particularly with the crab fisheries, when the anchovy get pushed onshore, when their habitat's kind of compressed, then the whales are coming closer to the shore to consume the anchovy, and so then they're getting entangled more. So I think you're right in trying to link the food to some of the entanglement risk there. And I think we know most about prey and humpbacks off California compared to other areas. But it's a great question, Dick. Thank you.
Yeah, Dick, I'm going to put in the chat. Your question's very relevant and timely. And again, I'm going to put on that take reduction team hat and I'll put in the chat the link for a virtual meeting that's occurring on March 2nd from 11 to 1. And that presentation talks about whale distribution, and Cascadia Research has done some work around feeding and diving depths that they present in that presentation. So that will be presented again. This is the second time it's being presented, but there is space there for public comment too, to kind of ask some of these questions in that realm where we have really specific humpback whale biologists that would be able to potentially answer a little bit more on kind of like the seasonality of the feeding patterns. Go ahead, Andrew. Is that a legacy
Sorry,
hand?
old hand.
Okay, no
Just
worries.
lower automatically.
Right. Sorry, let me just post this into the chat. Do we have other questions, comments on the presentation? Go ahead, Yvonne.
Thanks. I just wanted to compliment my colleagues at the centers and sort of talk a little bit about the paddling that's going on beneath the surface. So first, thank you to Amanda for her first time being the lead on the sort of social science and community section of the report. It is not easy to be the person who's on point for a section of this report. And, Mary and Andy, both very experienced, and, I'm sure they had some nervousness the first year that they did it. But so thank you, Amanda. Second, Andy at the end flashed the names of some of the folks who were background leads, and I really can't emphasize enough for those of you who may not know that our IEA folks have worked really hard to automate a lot of these sort of ideas and queries and graphs. And if you take a look at that whale entanglement indicator that Greg Williams put up on the screen, you can get a sort of idea of the kind of sort of fast generation reporting that they're working on. And if they had not already done a lot of that kind of automation work, the grunt work of making those, putting those together, if they had not done that before the fall furlough, I don't know that we would have been seeing an ESR at all, let alone something as comprehensive as what we're seeing this year. So there's that. And then the third thing, as all of you, some of you know from my constant blabbing about it, something very near and dear to my heart, of course, is our questions about who's eating whom in the California current. And our ability to collect, process, and analyze diet data took a serious hit personnel-wise in the last year. And I'm very concerned about that, and I don't know what to do with my concern. So I'm just going to share it in hopes that other people can also be stressed out about it, which is great of me, I know. So thanks so much.
Appreciate that, Yvonne.
Yvonne, if I could just follow up that comment on the diets. Yeah, it's kind of too bad about the diet stuff, because I feel like for the past several years that I've been working on this report, we've come to look at diets as an increasingly valuable resource for putting together the story when we try to build our narrative. So all the different diet information, I feel like it was really just starting to kind of pay off in terms of how we thought about things, and now we're, it's kind of at risk getting more of that. So yeah, that is unfortunate.
Go ahead, Kiva.
And I'll also just add on the diet front, I was sitting in on the scientific review group meeting for hake a couple weeks ago, and they were working on this really cool multi-species Seattle model that incorporated it. Previously, it had just incorporated hake cannibalism, but this one was also incorporating predation from sablefish, arrowtooth, and California sea lions. And the last sablefish diets were collected in 2008. And like the dynamics of the sablefish are a highly predatory fish, and the dynamics of that species have just gone off the walls in the last 5 years. And we have no idea what the implications of this massive pulse of sablefish is on the ecosystem. So that's my diet rant.
Well, I'll keep on the diet rant and put on my HMS hat because, Mary, I agree with you in the chat. I was really disappointed to see that the HMS diet work, because of loss of capacity, may not be available again. And that is a really useful data set and really kind of shows the dynamics of our highly migratory species and what might be causing these shifts. Also, we had in 2023 in the albacore fishery, a really poor year, and part of that was hearing that the schools were spread out and mixed in size, which I'm sure has connections to what they were eating and what they were switching in their forage, and not having that type of information when thinking about how that can impact some of those patterns and help us explain what might potentially cause these downturns in these really important fisheries that are kind of, filling in a gap sometimes when other fisheries are closed is really disheartening. And so I would hope that in the future that those could come back, and definitely am going to ring that bell from the HMS side of how important that information is, because it does help us understand some of the management measures and what might be occurring in our system when we're thinking about what management to move forward with. Others, thoughts, questions? I'll just really echo how amazing this report is, and I always learn something new about a different FMP and how you all do such a great job of crossing all aspects of the FMPs, whether it be the conditions and really tracing it back. Like, I'll just highlight the salmon spotlight tables. I really appreciated in the presentation you walking back what return years we're looking at this year and where we can like look at the conditions for what those return years classes were dealing with at the time in the ocean. And so appreciate that, really appreciate all of the extra work you've all done on kind of the community level and community resilience level and thinking about what this means for each one of our ports. I find that information really useful as well. And I'll stop because I see a hand up and I don't want to take all of the time. Whoever's hand up, go. I can't find you. Oh, William Smith, go for it. We're not hearing you if
Am I
you're
off mute
unmuted.
now?
Yeah, now you are. Go for it.
I thank you for allowing me to become very well informed from the information you put forth here. I find it very interesting and valuable. Basically, I have two questions. One, is there a central place for reporting whale entanglements, or do we just report that to the Coast Guard? And secondly, when I was listening to the talk about snowpack for February, did that take into account the recent storms of 6 to 8 feet of snow that we just got here this past week? Thank you very much.
Well, I can give you, I'll post the number for the whale entanglement hotline. So that's entanglement reporting hotline in the chat, and I'll let Mary move forward or Andy with the question about snowpack.
Go ahead, Andy. Looks like you want to answer.
Oh,
Go
I
for
was
it.
going to say quickly, no, that did the most recent last week of snowpack. No, we don't. I don't have that. So I'm going to try to, before we give the next presentation, we try to get the most up to date thing, but it's usually behind by a little bit. So I had not seen that, but I don't know where exactly you're commenting that snowpack is. I don't know what the story is for the entire, all the different regions. But yeah, we'll take a look and we try to update that as often as we can. But my comments on that were not based on the most recent snows. So
That was for Central and Northern California.
okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions?
Well, he had there was a second part of his question. He was asked about where was there centralized reporting for the.
I put that in the chat. So yeah, there's reporting hotlines and West Coast, no enforcement, derelict gear, entanglement reporting hotlines, lots of numbers there.
Thank you. I'll copy and paste that to our CPVs.
Thank you. All right. Well, just huge round of applause then for our team. Oh yeah, and Gilly mentioned, I think, let's go ahead and we didn't have a break built in, so why don't we go ahead and take a 15-minute break now, and we'll see everyone back in 15 minutes. Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate all of this hard work. And I'll see you all at 10:15.
Thanks, and I'll go ahead and put up a break slide.